Oke, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good
Waalaikumsalam
afternoon.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kalisa Jihan Mahira. So today I'll be serving as a moderator for today's proposal seminar. We are here to listen to the research proposal presentation. But the first one will be presenting by Halwa Aminah. Halwa, you ready?
Yes, Kalisa.
Okay, time is yours.
Okay. Yeah, please, I need help to share my PPT.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Kalisa. Okay, let me start the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. So today I would like to present my research proposal. The title is The Relationship Between Sipaling English Stigma and Communication Apprehension Among Indonesian EFL Students. So this study or my research is actually focuses on how very familiar yet rarely discussed social phenomenon among us as an EFL student. Okay, so next slide, please. Thank you. All right, the first one is the introduction and background research. So I would like to start with a very simple reality. For us, as an Indonesian EFL student, speaking English is not just difficult, but it's actually quite risky. It's not because we don't know English or we have no capability in speaking in English, but mostly because we are afraid of being judged, whether we do mispronunciation or we just don't know how to make it suitable because English has so many words and you need to adjust within the context and so on. So in Indonesia, English is like rarely used in daily basis conversation. So students mostly struggle to just find a safe place to practice their English skill. Even in classroom, which are expected to be the safest and supportive place for students, still they choose silence. All right, so this phenomenon actually already explained by what James C. McCroskey calls communication apprehension, which is basically anxiety when speaking. But here is something quite different, or maybe this is the twist. So this study argues that anxiety alone is not enough to explain the problem, because in our context, there is a social label which I'm going to talk about in my research, which is Sipaling Inggris, where students who speak are seen as showing off. And honestly, it will hit differently for us. And this could create pressure and also making the students back even when they are capable, even when they actually can speak in English. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. Now we're going to the research problem and the significance. So my core problem in this study is that Indonesian students often stay silent, even when they are capable of speaking in English. And the previous studies mostly just explain through the psychological aspect, while actually it has a social psychological aspect. So I do not want to ignore these social influences. And for me, I see it as one of those overlooked factors. It's subtle, but it is powerful. So this research is going to be really important because it's going to shift our perspective. It will help the researcher see that speaking problems are not just internal, but also social. And then for teachers, it will give insight to hidden classroom dynamics, why students are quiet even in interactive class. So for student itself, it will raises awareness that sometimes it's not just about our ability, but it's about the environment that we created. Right, next slide, please. Okay, research objective and the hypothesis. So based on that phenomenon, the study will examine whether there is a relationship between sipaling English stigma and communication apprehension, and how strong is that influence. And I will also look at how different level of perceived stigma affects student anxiety when speaking. And the hypothesis is quite straightforward, which is the stronger the stigma or the fear students feels, the higher their communication apprehension. In a simple word, the more people judge you, the less you will talk. Right, next please. Thank you. All right, now it's literature review and theoretical framework. So I will connect this phenomenon into some major theories. Yes. So, but I will still keep it in a simple way. I took one theory from sociolinguistic perspective, William Labov, which explained that language is not just about communication, but it's also about identity. Because the way we speak shows who we are and also which group we belong to. And then Henry Tufgill and Turner also explain in social identity theory, which he said that actually people will adjust their behavior to fit in with their group. So if speaking English makes you look weird or different or too much or showing off, so you may keep avoiding speaking English just to be accepted in your group. At the same time, my previous theory comes from Mikrowski, is that the theory of communication apprehension, which explained that anxiety side, yeah, the psychological side. But this study combines both perspective, and I'm not just gonna say that CA is not just psychological, but it is actually socially shaped. So fear of speaking is not only in your head, but it influenced by how people around you react. Next, please. Okay, next is research design. So move to the methodology, of course, from the title, the relationship, I will use quantitative correlational design. And I'm not going to manipulate anything. I'm just going to examine whether there is a relationship between the stigma and the anxiety or not. And the participant, of course, have to be an Indonesian EFL student. That's the first thing. And I will use purposive sampling. Why? Because they're going to be chosen based on their relevant experience in learning and using English. So whether they are experiencing it directly or indirectly, what I mean by saying directly or indirectly is that their experience, whether they are being mocked or judged, or they see other people being mocked and judged. And to ensure the quality of the instrument, I will use Kornberg Alpha to test the to validate my instrument by experts. So next slide, please. Right, data collection and analysis. Yeah, for the data collection, I will use a questionnaire. It will distribute it online. And also with proper ethical consideration, first is consent and then next is confidential. So I use two data. The first one is primary data, which come from the questionnaire, and the secondary data from the relevant literature about the phenomenon. So for the analysis, I will start with descriptive statistic to understand the data and to describe the data. And then I will use Pearson correlation to see if there is any relationship between stigma and anxiety. And if needed, I will continue with using regression analysis. And of course, all of those stuff will go through SPSS. Next, please. All right. is the last but not least, conclusion. In order to conclude or what I've just explained to you, this study is actually going to explain why students keep silence in EFL classroom. So it's not just about their lack of ability or confidence, but it is deeply influenced by social dynamics, especially peer stigma, like si paling Inggris, and by showing that actually communication apprehension socially constructed. So my research is going to encourage a shift on how we view language learning. So instead of just trying to improving student skill, we also need to improve the environment in making classroom psychologically safe and socially supportive. Because at the end of the day, students don't just need to know English, they need to feel safe when they're using it. Thank you.
Okay, Halwa, thank you. I would like to appreciate your hard work for present a really good topic for today. So we move to another participants. So the next will be presented by Bunga Mutiara. Okay,
Lisa.
okay, wait. Okay, Bunga, time is yours. Wait.
Thank you so much, Halisa, for the opportunity. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Bunga Mutiara from Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, and in this seminar proposal, I'm going to talk about the effect of vocabulary enrichment through literature on the writing skills of students. Please, next. Okay, so before we jump into the background and research gap, I would like to introduce the reason why I chose this specific topic. It is because we all know that language is our primary tool for expressing thoughts and feelings. However, for many English as a foreign language or EFL students, writing remains the most daunting of the four skills. We often find that students have ideas but lack the lexical depth to express them cohesively. And today, I want to discuss a method that uses the beauty of literature to bridge this gap. So this topic will mainly discuss about the correlation of vocabulary enrichment to surrounding students' confidence in their English ability skills, mainly about their writing skills, because we all know that in order for you to organize a cohesive and a beautifully read writing, you need to also master a variety of vocabularies to make your words diverse in your writing, in your English writing. Okay, so talking about the background and research gap, in the realm of ELT, English language teaching, writing is more than just putting words on paper. It is about interconnected thoughts communicating through a rich vocabulary. It is more than just colloquial words that you throw randomly with when you're talking to your friends, but writing is somehow is in the majority of the time you will use your writing skills to formal setting, for example for your research paper or when you are applying scholarship, and etc. and etc. Therefore, you need to master specifically more formal vocabularies to inject to inject to your paper. So my research is inspired by the idea that immersion in literature, specifically vintage texts ranging from the late 18th century to the early 1990s, can provide students with a treasure chest of words, because in the literature text, especially literature stories, they mainly use formal words or thesaurus words that can color more vocabularies to the students' writing. As Spearman in 2022 notes, literature enhances grammar and vocabulary. Furthermore, from a sociolinguistic perspective, the words we choose represent our social and academic background. If we want our students to succeed in scholarly situations, they must move away from colloquialism. Colloquialism is the vocabulary that you use with your friend, something like you're changing what are you doing to what you do. That's not very formally for you to use in a scholar setting, and it doesn't make you look more like you study a lot of English vocabularies, and toward a more sophisticated academic vocabulary, like the one I mentioned. It is the Sauer's vocabularies. This study proposes that literary texts are the most efficient tools for this acquisition. However, there is a problem, which will be my research gap. While many teachers acknowledge that literature is good for students, there is a lack of structured, quantitative evidence proving its direct effect as a specific intervention. Previous studies often focus on general observations or student perspectives. Therefore, my research seeks to fill this gap by providing empirical, quasi-experimental data that isolates literature-derived vocabulary as the primary variable to see if it truly causes a measurable improvement in writing performance. I want this research to see if the students, if partially of the students that uses the literature derived vocabulary will write better than the students that don't. That's why I use the quasi-experimental data. Next slide, please. Okay, now there are questions and objectives show up for my research. These are to address this gap. I have formulated 3 central research questions. The first one is there a significant difference in baseline writing scores between my experimental and control groups? Secondly, is there a significant difference in their scores after the intervention? And thirdly, ultimately, is this literature-based program effective? So my objectives follow suit. I aim to assess initial writing levels, analyze the post-test differences, and verify the efficacy of this enrichment program as a pedagogical tool. So I would really like to know if my research on this one really works on the students, because I want to show everyone that literature plays a big role in enhancing one's vocabulary. Moreover, knowing that literature in terms of books or movies, we know that it is a very engaging amusement for kids nowadays, like Pride and Prejudice or etc. and etc. by Jane Austen. So yeah, I want them to like immerse their amusement with their knowledge as well by doing this research. Next, please. Okay, now how about this research in the literature review? Theoretically, this study stands on 2 pillars. First one is the interdependence principle and the lexical hypothesis. The interdependence principle asserts that reading and writing are mutually supportive. Reading literature provides the input that writing requires for output. I think it is very obvious when you ask someone how to improve your English skills, they will recommend you to read more. But sometimes we are confused on what kind of medias we need to read in order to bolster our English ability skills. And therefore, with my research, I hope that people can find their source of studying English by something that they find interesting. Like one of it is literature readings or literature movies. And the lexical hypothesis, supported by scholars like Mahmoud and Abdul Rahman, posits that writing fluency is a direct reflection of a student's vocabulary richness. Literature stimulates the brain to move beyond literal meanings and toward contextual mastery. Next, please. Now, onto the conceptual framework. My study follows an input, process, and output IPO model. The input is the vocabulary enrichment through literature intervention, and the process is the quasi-experimental journey from pre-test to post-test, and the output is the actual change in the students' English writing skills, specifically their lexical range and vocabulary richness. And the hypothesis based on this framework, I will test two hypotheses. First is the null hypothesis, which means there will be no significant difference between the groups after the intervention, meaning that this obviously this research do nothing to the students for their vocabulary enrichment, or two, the alternative hypothesis, the program will have a statistically significant positive effect, resulting in higher scores for the students who studied literature-based vocabulary. It is meaning that it is obvious that they upgrade their vocabulary enrichment. Now onto the research design, please. Next slide. Okay, as I've said before, the methodology, I have chosen a quasi-experimental research design, specifically the non-equivalent groups pre-test, post-test design. This is ideal for an educational setting where we cannot randomly assign individual students, but must work with intact classes. To ensure the results are reliable, I will use Cohen's kappa to maintain high interrate reliability among the scorers. Now, for the population and sample, I will take place at SMAN 1 Kota Serang during the 2024/2025 academic year. My sample consists of two classes, totaling approximately 72 students. One class will serve as the experimental group, receiving the literature treatment, while the other serve as the control group, following the standard curriculum. And the last one is my research instrument. How will then I measure my success? I will use a standardized English writing assessment for both pre-test and post-test. The essays will be graded using an analytical scoring rubric adapted from international standards like ELT or TOEFL. While I will look at grammar and organization, the core focus of the scoring will be on lexical range, the variety and precision of the vocabulary used. Okay, so in conclusion, I believe that by reintroducing literature into the EFL writing classroom, we aren't just teaching students old stories, we are giving them the linguistic tools to build their own futures. A wider understanding of synonyms and antonyms leads to higher confidence, and higher confidence leads to better communication. Thank you for your time and attention. I am now open to any questions or suggestions you may have. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Bunga Mutiara. Your delivery was very confident. It's clear that you have mastered your material inside and out. Okay, maybe next will be presented by Faiz. Is there Faiz in this room? Well, I think he's not here, so we will skip to Maulana Krishna Handika. The time is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maulana Krisnandika. Today, I would like to present my research entitled "The Effect of English Movies with Subtitles on Vocabulary Retention." Okay, this study focus on how English movies, especially with subtitles, can help students remember vocabulary better. Next slide, please. Okay. For the background, vocabulary is one of the aspects in learning English because without vocabulary, students can communicate effectively. However, many students still have difficulties, especially in remembering vocabulary for a long time. Jadi mereka biasanya cuma hafal sebentar, habis itu lupa lagi. Okay. Traditional methods like memorizing words lists are often boring and not effective. That's why we need a more engaging and meaningful learning method. One of them is using English movies because they provide real context, visual support, and natural language. Next slide. For the problem, based on that background, there are several problems. The first one is students forget vocabulary quickly. The second, learning media is often and not engaging. And third, there is a need for an effective method to improve long-term vocabulary retention. So this research tries to solve those problems by using English movies subtitles. Next slide. Okay, next slide is research question. So the research question of the study is does watching English movies with English subtitles significantly affect vocabulary retention? Jadi intinya apakah metode ini benar-benar efektif atau enggak? Next slide. Okay. The objective of the study is to investigate the effect of English movies with subtitles on student vocabulary retention, and also to measure how well students can retain vocabulary after they are exposed to this method. Next slide. In this research, there are two variables. The independent variable is English movies with subtitles, and the dependent variable is vocabulary retention. Jadi yang kita ubah itu penggunaan film, dan yang kita lihat hasilnya adalah kemampuan mengingat vocabulary. Next slide. Okay. The study is supported by several theories. This one is cognitive theory of multimedia learning, which explains that students learn better with visual and audio together. The second, dual coding theory, which says that information is easier to remember when it is processed in both visual and verbal forms. And third, input hypothesis, which emphasize the importance of understandable input in language learning. So combining movies and subtitles will help students retain vocabulary better. The last one is research design. This research just a quantitative approach with a quasi experimental design. Specifically, it is used one group pretest and post-test design. So students are tested before and after the treatment to see the difference. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, so thank you, Krishna. I would like to appreciate your presentation for today. Okay, maybe the next will be presented by Tamam.
Yes.
Okay, Tamam, the stage is yours.
Uh, okay. Hello everyone. My name is Tamam Ramadan. Today I would like to present my research entitled The Correlation Between English Language Social Media Exposure and Student Vocabulary Mastery at Senior High School. In this study, I focus on how students' daily exposure to English through social media may relate to their vocabulary development. Next slide, please. In my view, English plays an important role in global communication. In learning English, I consider vocabulary mastery as a fundamental component because it directly affects students' ability to understand and use the language. However, based on the EF English Proficiency Index, Indonesia is still categorized at a relatively low to moderate level of English proficiency. From this condition, I see that improving vocabulary mastery is still a major challenge. In my perspective, vocabulary is not only about knowing words, but also about being able to use them effectively in communication. Next. In today's context, I observe that students spend significant amount of time on social media platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. These platforms contain a large amount of English content. From a language learning perspective, I see this as an opportunity for incidental learning, where students can acquire vocabulary naturally without formal instruction. However, I also believe that the effectiveness of this exposure depends on how often students access it, how long they engage with it, and what type of content they consume. Next. When I review studies, I found that most of them focus on social media as a learning tool used intentionally in the classroom. However, in real life situation, I see that students are exposed to English naturally through social media without structured learning. In my opinion, this natural exposure is often overlooked, even though it may play a significant role in vocabulary development. In addition, I found that previous studies rarely analyze exposure and measure effects such as frequency, duration, and content type. Therefore, through this study, I aim to fill this gap by examining social media exposure in a more detailed and measurable way. Next, based on this background, I formulated three research questions. First is, how is students' English language social media exposure? Second, how is their vocabulary mastery? And third is, there are significant correlation between the two variables. Next. In line with those questions, there are objectives of my study are to identify student social media exposure, to identify their vocabulary mastery, and to examine the correlation between variables. Next, in my study, I expect to provide both theoretical and practical contributions. Theoretically, I hope the study contributes to EFL research, especially in digital exposure and vocabulary learning. Particularly, I expect this study can help students use social media more effectively for learning and help teachers design more contextual learning strategies. Next. In this study, I define vocabulary mastery as consisting of three aspects: form, meaning, and use. I believe these aspects are interconnected. Students may recognize the word, but they may not fully understand its meaning or use it correctly in context. Therefore, I view vocabulary mastery as a comprehensive ability, not just memorization. I also define social media exposure through three indicators: frequency, duration, and content type. In my perspective, through repeated exposure to meaningful input, learners might gradually build vocabulary knowledge over time. Next. Based on my theoretical framework, I assume that social media uh, exposure is related to vocabulary mastery. It's assumed that students who are more frequently exposed to English spend more time engaging with it and access various types of content may have a better vocabulary mastery. However, I also acknowledge that exposure alone does not guarantee learning. Other factors such as attention, motivation, and prior knowledge may also influence the outcome. Therefore, in this study, I only focus on examining the relationship, not quotient. Next. In this study, I use a quantitative approach with a correlational design. I choose this design because I aim to examine the relationship between variables and not to determine cause and effect. Next. There are two variables in my study. The first is in the independent variable is English language social media exposure, and the dependent variable is vocabulary mastery. Next. To collect the data, I use two instruments. First, a questionnaire consisting 20 items to measure social media exposure. Second is a vocabulary test consisting of 30 questions to measure vocabulary mastery. Next. In analyzing the data, I apply several steps. First, I use descriptive statistics to describe the overall data. Next, I conduct a normality test to determine whether the data are normally distributed. This step is important because it determines whether I will use Pearson or Spearman correlation. And finally, I conduct hypothesis testing to determine whether the relationship between variables is statistically significant. Next. Yeah. That's all my presentations. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alright, Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Tamam. You handle this very much with your research approach is very solid. Okay, maybe the next will be presented by Marcel.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you, Kalisa, for the time. Good afternoon. And first of all, I would like to express my thank you for Prof. Dr. Syafrizal MPD, the lecturer of this course, and of course you, my classmates, for supporting this material for me. And yeah, sorry for the noise in. Okay, so today I would like to present my research proposal. The title is The Impact of AI Dependency on Reading Interest and Critical Thinking Skills Among English Education Students. Okay, so in this presentation, my main focus to examine whether dependency on AI has a significant effect on student interest and critical thinking skills. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, so first I would like to explain chapter 1, which cover the background, problem focus, objective, and significance of the study. Second, I will discuss chapter 2, which contains the theoretical foundation, previous study, research gap, conceptual framework, and hypothesis. And the third, I will explain chapter 3, which present the research design, sample, instrument, pilot test, and data analysis plan. Okay, can you please next slide? Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So in this study, begins from the reality that digital technology has changed the way of the students uh, to learn, read, and search information and complete the academic test. So according to Chen and Hu in 2023, today many students use generative AI tools such as GPT, Grammarly, Quillbot, uh, translator, and summarizers. So the problem is not simply the existence of AI. The main concern is excessive dependency. So in this study, AI dependency means students rely too much on AI to understand the material, answer question, and produce the academic content. And this makes study relate decision. Okay, when this happens, students may reduce their own effort to read original text, verify information, and make conclusion independently. Okay, please next slide. We are jump to the problem focus. Okay, so based on the background, the study identifies several problems. AI used in academic works is increasing rapidly, and many students use AI for they search for instant answers, summary, translation, and writing support. So excessive the many reduce students effort to read complete academic source and may also weaken their ability to analyze and evaluate information with independently. So there is also still indeed evidence in the Indonesian higher education context, especially at uh, Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa. Therefore, this study has two main questions. So number one is, does AI dependency affect reading interest? And does AI dependency affect critical thinking skills? Okay, so that's the two main questions in this research. And I give the variables. The variables is X is AI dependency, Y number one is reading interest, and Y number two is critical thinking skills. Okay, can you please next slide? Okay, scope and significance. This study is limited to English education, student of Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, cohort 2023. The total population is 138 students, and the sample I use is 58 students. So the independent variable AI dependency, while the dependent variable are reading interest and critical thinking skills. So the study use a quantitative correlational ex post facto design, and the study is important three ways, like theoretically, and connects AI dependency, reading interest, and critical thinking in one framework. Okay. Can you please next slide? Yeah. We jump into theoretical foundation. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we move in chapter 2. The study is built on several key concepts. First, AI in higher education refer to digital systems that support the brainstorming, writing, research, feedback, and other learning tasks. Second, AI dependency means excessive reliance on AI, especially when AI starts replacing reading, uh, reasoning, and verification. Third, reading interest means enjoyment, attention, and willingness to read academic material. Fourth, critical thinking skills refer to interpretation, analysis, evaluation, inference, and explanation. The proposal also includes AI literacy as a supporting concept because it helps to explain why some students use AI critically and responsibly, while others become dependent the dependent on the reference support based on uh, Lau in 2024 and Baldrige at 2025. Okay, next slide. Okay, previous study and research gap. The literature review shows that many previous studies have discussed AI in education. Sorry. Some studies like Sarwan at 2024 found that students generally view generative AI as useful for learning and writing support. Other studies show that AI chatbots becoming part of routine in student learning. There are also studies by Tian and Seng in 2025 saying that AI has a pedagogical content. I mean pedagogical potential, but also ethical concerns. Okay, some study also show that stronger AI dependence is associated with weaker critical thinking. However, there are still important gaps. Few study examine AI dependency specifically in academic risk factor. The relationship between AI dependency and reading interest is still underexplored. So the reading interest and critical thinking are rarely tested together in quantitative framework. So there is also limited quantitative evidence from Indonesian public universities, including Untirta. Okay, next slide. Okay, conceptual framework and hypothesis. So the conceptual framework of this study, sorry, the conceptual framework of this study is simple. AI dependency is the independent variable, and it is expect to affect two dependent variables like reading interest and critical thinking skills based on this framework. So the study proposed two hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that AI dependency significantly affect reading interest. The second hypothesis is that AI dependency significantly affect critical thinking skills. Okay, move to the next slide. Okay, research design and sample. The study used quantitative research design specifically in as a correlational ex post facto approach. It is correlational because it examines the relationship between independent variable and two dependent variable. It is ex post facto because it is the post facto because the researcher does not manipulate the variable, but only measure condition that already exist. The study will be conducted in the English Education Study Program at Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, focus on student from the 2023. Okay, and the population, like I said before, is 138 students, and the sample I use 58 students. And determine using the Slovin formula, and the sampling technique is simple random sampling. Okay, move to the next slide. Yeah, this study has three major variables. The first is AI dependency with indicators such as frequency of AI use, reliance for understanding, task completion, trusting AI without checking, and difficulty working without AI. The second is reading interest with indicator such as enjoyment of reading, attention to text, reading frequency, time spent reading, and initiative to search for the sources. And the third is critical thinking skill, including interpretation, analysis, evaluation, inference, and explanation. So to measure them, the study I use is questionnaire for AI dependency and reading interest and critical thinking. Tests for performance based measurement. And the questionnaire use a 5-point Likert scale. Okay, move to the next slide. Okay. Before the main data collection, the researcher conduct a pilot test with 30 students outside the main sample. The pilot test was used to check clarity, validity, and reliability of the instrument. From the validity test, the results show 18 valid items for AI dependency, 7 valid items for reading interest, and 13 valid items for critical thinking. So the final instrument consists of 48 usable items. And the reliability, the are 0.87 for AI dependency, 0.84. And for reading interest and critical thinking, 0.81, because all of them are above 0.70. The instruments are considered reliable for data analysis. The study will use descriptive statistic, normality test, linearity test, and simple linear regression with significance level of 0.05. Okay, next slide. We'll jump into the closing. Okay. So in this conclusion, the study examined whether AI dependency influence reading interest and critical thinking skills among English student education and at Untirta. The proposal response to I use in real issue today, like digital learning environment, especially because AI is becoming part of students and daily academic practice. I hope this research can contribute to more balanced, ethical, and academically responsible AI use in English education. Okay, thank you for your attention. That's all for my research. The time I give back to the moderator. Thank you.
Okay, that was a top-notch presentation, Marcel. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, next we will jump into Shelly.
Okay, let me give a sec.
Okay, Shelly, the time is 10 minutes. So, yep, time is yours.
Okay, so wait, is my background showed? Okay. So okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, honorable examiners and all of my fellow friends. Thank you for the opportunity to given me today. My name is Haina Putri Nadine from the English Education Department of Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa University. And today I would like to present my research proposal entitled The Use of Social Media Improving Students' Speaking Confidence. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with this topic. So, why this topic is really important? So, in Indonesia, many students still face significant difficulties in speaking English confidently. In EFL context, English is rarely used in daily communication. I have identified four main issues. That is, the first, students generally have low confidence in speaking. And second, there is a lack of practice in daily life. And third, without intervention, students will continue to have poor speaking skills. And lastly, the fourth one, there are still limited studies focusing specifically on speaking confidence through social media. So, however, since social media is now a huge part of students' daily life, it provides a great opportunity to support their learning process. Next slide, please. So, based on that background, this study focuses on the relationship between social media use and students' speaking confidence. So, the main questions are, how does social media influence students' speaking confidence? And second, what to what extent does it help them in practicing their speaking skills? Next slide. Next slide, please.
I have already.
It's not showed on my screen.
Okay, wait.
It's all right. Take your time. Okay. So, in the line with the object, in the line with the problems mentioned, the objective of this research are there are three. The first is to identify the influence of social media on students' confidence, and second, to analyze the level of their speaking confidence, and the lastly, um, and and to find significant correlation between these two variables. Okay, next. Okay, so the findings of this study are expected to be beneficial for like students to help them finding new ways of building confidence, and then for the teachers to provide a reference for using social media as an innovative learning tool, and for the future researchers, like to serve as a foundation or reference for further studies on these similar topics. Next slide. Okay, so on this slide, I want to discuss the EFL context in Indonesia. As we know, English is a foreign language here, very unknown to us, meaning it is not used in daily conversation. So students only like practice it in the classroom, which limits their exposure. This of environment is a primary reason why students find it hard to be fluent and confident. Uh, Next slide. Okay, so to bridge that gap, social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube offers a solution. So these platforms provide flexible and accessible learning opportunities. They offer authentic English content, meaning students can hear how native speakers actually talk in real life, and they can access this anytime, anywhere for free without any payments or budget on the go. The next slide. So moving to the eighth slide, let's talk about speaking skills. So speaking is actually often considered the most challenging skills because it requires a real time processing. So my observation shows like three main issues that the students need continuous practice, which they rarely get. They feel extremely nervous when they ask to speak, and they have a deep fear of making grammatical mistakes or mispronounce words. Next slide. Okay, so why is confidence so important? As you can see on the slide 9, confidence is directly influences a student's willingness to speak. When their confidence is low, it creates this anxiety, and as a result, that students became passive in the classroom, even they actually know the materials. Higher the confidence helps them communicate more effectively and take risks in learning the language itself. Okay, next slide. So social media can bridge this gap by there are four that I found. That is, the first is providing easy access to English materials. Second, increasing students' exposure to the language. Third, reducing the fear of formal evaluation. And fourth, and encouraging them to practice in a more relaxed environment. Next slide. Okay, so for the last slide here, to conduct this research, I will use quantitative method. The data will be collected through questionnaires distributed to participants and analyzed statistically to find the result. So yeah, that concludes my presentation today. I am now open to questions, suggestions from the examiners to improve this proposal. Thank you so much for your attention. Sorry for I had mistakes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Shelly. I'm really impressed by the clarity of your slides. You made a complex topic look so easy to understand. Okay, maybe next we will move into Wisnu. Okay, Wisnu. The time is 10 minutes after you already said the salam.
Okay.
So the time and the stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Alif Nugroho from the English Education Department. Today, I would like to present my research proposal. The title is The Use of Western Movies to Improve EFL Students' Speaking Skills. Okay. The first slide. Let me start with the background. Speaking is one of the most important skills in learning English because it allows students to communicate in real situations. According to Richards, speaking reflects learners' ability to use language in social interaction. However, many EFL students still face several problems. They often feel anxious, have limited vocabulary, struggle with pronunciation, and lack exposure to real English conversation. This makes them less confident and less active in speaking activities. Next slide. To solve the problem, teachers need effective and engaging media. One of the potential media is a movie. Movie provide authentic language input, including natural conversation, pronunciation, and even gesture. According to King, movies help learners understand how language is used in real context. They also increase student motivation and make learning more interesting as stated by Kabuha. So the focus in this research is on Western movies. Western movies are useful because they expose students to native speaker conversation, including informal expression and cultural context. They also help students improve pronunciation and intonation because students can imitate how native speakers talk. In addition, visual elements in movie help students understand meaning more easily, which can reduce anxiety when speaking. Next slide. The research question based on the background. This study is guided by three research questions. The first is, do Western movie significantly improve EFL student speaking skills? The second, how do students perceive the use of Western movies in learning speaking? And the third is, how do Western movies influence student confidence and participation? Next, the objective and significance. The objective of this study are first to examine the effect of Western movies on student speaking skills. Second, to identify student perceptions. The third, to analyze their confidence and participation. And this study is significant in two ways. Theoretical, it contributes to development of teaching speaking using media. And the second is practically, it helps teachers apply movie as a tool to improve student speaking, confidence, and participation. Next slide. The literature review. Speaking competence includes several components such as fluency, pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, and comprehension. And audiovisual media like movies support learning through dual channels, meaning students learn better from both visual and audio input. Previous studies shows that movie can improve vocabulary, listening skills, and motivation. However, research focusing specifically on speaking skills is still limited. This gap becomes the basis of my research. And next, this study is based on the idea that exposure to authentic input from movies can increase student confidence, which then leads to improved speaking skills. The hypotheses are there's no significant effect of Western movies on speaking skill, and the second, there is a significant positive effect on Western movies on speaking skills. And the methodology, this research, I use quantitative design. The study will be conducted at Royal Academy. The independent variable is Western movies, and the dependent variable is student speaking skill. The participants will be selected using purposive sampling, focusing on active EFL students with basic proficiency. The instrument include a speaking task to assess fluency, pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, and comprehension. And then a questionnaire using a Likert scale to measure student perception. Next slide. The last slide is a conclusion. The study aims to explore how Western movie can improve students' speaking skill, confidence, and participation. I hope this research can provide useful insight from English teachers in creating more engaging learning environment. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All right, Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Wisnu. You provided some very unique perspectives that I hadn't considered before. So the next presenter will be presented by Ibnu Kawiyul Amin. Ibnu, your time is 10 minutes after you say salam, and then the time is.
Okay, thank you, Kale. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ibnu Koil Amin, and Today, I would like to present my research entitled The Correlation Between Student Self-Efficacy and Speaking Performance in EFL Context. Next slide, please. Speaking is one of the most important skills in learning English as a foreign language. However, in reality, many students still face difficulties when speaking English. For example, they often hesitate, lack fluency, and feel not confident. This shows that speaking problems are not only caused by lack of language ability, but also influenced by psychological factors. One of the important factors is self-efficacy, or students' belief in their own ability to speak. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, for the next slide is research gap. So many previous studies have discussed speaking performance in EFL. However, most of them focus on teaching methods or language competence. Meanwhile, studies that focus on psychological factor, especially self-efficacy, are still limited. In addition, research in Indonesian university context is also still rare. Therefore, this study tries to fill that gap. So the main question for this question is there a significant correlation between student self-efficacy and speaking performance in EFL? Next slide, please. So for the research objective is to investigate the correlation between student self-efficacy, speaking performance. Specifically, this study aims to find out whether the relationship between these two variables is significant or not. And for the next slide is significance of study. This study has both theoretical and practical significance. Theoretically, this research contributes to the development of knowledge in EFL, especially in understanding the role of psychological factors like self-efficacy. Practically, this research can help teachers understand the importance of building student confidence. It can also help students realize that their belief in themselves affects their speaking performance. Next slide, please. For the last one is self-efficacy refers to a person's belief in their ability to perform a task. In the context of speaking, it means students' confidence in expressing ideas, using vocabulary and grammar, pronouncing words correctly, and speaking fluently. Students with high self-efficacy tend to be more confident and active in speaking activities. On the other hand, students with low self-efficacy usually feel anxious, hesitate, and tend to avoid speaking. So for the conclusion is, to conclude, this study highlights that self-efficacy plays an important role in student speaking performance. Students who have higher confidence in their ability tend to participate more actively and perform better in speaking tasks. This means that psychological factors, not only language skill, are important in EFL learning. Therefore, teachers should not only focus on teaching language, but also support students in building their confidence. So thank you. Maybe that's all. Thank you for the time, Kale.
Okay, very neat and professional presentation. Thank you, Ibnu Kawil Amin. And then next will be presented by Febiola Putri.
So yeah, good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you for the opportunity given to me to present my research proposal today. My name is Febiola Putri, and this presentation I would like to present my research with the title "The Relationship Between Peer Language Stigma and Speaking Confidence Among EFL Learners." Okay, next slide. Okay. For the first is a background study. So English play a very important role as a global language, especially in academic settings, professional environments, and even in daily communication. So because of this, students are expected to be able to use English effectively, particularly in speaking. So in the context of EFL learning, speaking is considered one of the most essential skills because it allows students to communicate their ideas directly. However, at the same time, speaking is also one of the most challenging skills for many learners. So, in reality, many students actually understand English quite well. They have already learned vocabulary and grammar, but when it comes to speaking, they still feel afraid to express themselves. So the situation happens because speaking is not only influenced by uh, language ability, but also by psychological factor. So, for example, like a student might lack confidence, feel anxious, or be afraid of making mistakes when speaking in front of others. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, it's problem statement. So from here, as we can see, based on background that I have explained, I can be seen that student speaking ability is not only influenced by their language skills, but also by psychological factors such as confidence and fear of making mistakes. In classroom situation, students often feel afraid of being judged when they speak English, especially in front of their peers. This fear can reduce their willingness to participate in speaking activities. So, when students receive positive support from their classmates, they tend to feel more confident and motivated to speak. So, however, in many cases, students experience negative reaction from their peers, such as teasing, loving, or mocking for their pronunciation and accent. Okay, next slide, please. Again, the next slide is research gap. So previous study on speaking confidence in EFL context have mostly focused on internal factors such as honesty, motivation, and self-efficacy. So these studies have shown that psychological factors play an important role in influencing student willingness to speak. So, however, the role of external factors, especially peer influence, has not been explored in depth, but while some studies mention that negative peer evaluation can increase speaking honesty, they do not specially examine peer language stigma as a distinct variable. So research on language stigma, such as accent or pronunciation bias, is more commonly discussed in sociolinguistic studies rather than in EFL classroom context. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the next is a research question. For in the line, the research question, the study has two main objectives. The first objective is to investigate whether there is significant relationship between peer language stigma and speaking confidence among EFL learners. So the second is objective is to examine the extent to which peer language stigma affects students speaking confidence. So this study not only aims to identify the relationship between the two variables, but also to understand how strong influence is. So next slide, please. Okay, for this slide is about research objective. So in line with the research question, the study has two main object. The first is objective is to investigate whether there is a significant relationship between peer linguistic stigma and speaking confidence among EF learners. So the second is objective is to examine the extent to which is peer language stigma affects students speaking confidence. So the study not only aims to identify the relationship between the two variables, but also understanding to how strong the influence is. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. This slide is about research significance. So several previous studies have explored factors that influence student speaking ability in EFL context, especially from psychological and social perspective. First, speaking confidence has been identified as an important factor that supports students' participation and performance. So, according to previous students who have higher confidence are more willing to express their ideas and actively to engage in speaking activity. So the second is NASD. Particularly fear of negative evaluation is considered one of the main barriers in speaking. So when students feel afraid of making mistakes or being judged by others, they tend to avoid speaking situation even if they have substance language knowledge. So the third is studies on language stigma, especially related to accent and pronunciation, so that negative reaction such as teasing or mocking can have seriously psychological effect. So this reaction may lead to feelings of embarrassment, low self-esteem, and even withdrawal from communication. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Next is about literature review. So this slide presents the concept 12 of framework the study. In this research, there are two main variables. The first is peer language stigma as the independent variable, and the second is speaking confidence as a dependent variable. So peer stigma refers to negative reaction from classmates such as teasing, mocking, or judging student English, especially related to their accent, pronunciation, or speaking ability. This negative experience might create psychological effects such as fear or negative evaluation, NESD, and insecurity. So as a result, a student might feel less confident and become more to participate in speaking activities. So, okay, we can go next slide. Okay, this is about conceptual framework. Based on the conceptual framework, the study proposed the following hypothesis. The hypothesis states that there is no significant relationship between peer language stigma and speaking confidence among EFL learners. Meanwhile, the alternative hypothesis states that there is significant negative relationship between peer language stigma and speaking confidence. So this means that higher levels of peer language stigma are expected to be associated by lower level of speaking confidence. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this we can go hypothesis. So this study uses quantitative correlational research design. So design is chosen because the purpose of this study is to examine the relationship between two variables, namely peer language stigma and speaking confidence without manipulating variables. So the participant of this study is EFL student from the English education department with an estimated sample of around 30 to 100 students. The sampling technique is used to confidence sampling based on student ability and accessibility. So the collect data, the study use questionnaires with scale, and questionnaires are designed to measure students' perception of peer language stigma and their level speaking confidence. So next slide, please. No, next slide, please. Okay. For the last is conclusion. So speaking, confidence is influenced not only by language ability but also by psychological and social factors. Peer language stigma, such as negative reaction from classmates, might reduce student willingness and confidence to speak. So therefore, this study aims to examine the relationship between peer language stigma and speaking confidence is expected to contribute to creating a more supportive learning environment. Okay, I think enough from me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Fabiola, that you have a gift for simplifying complex concepts. Yep, maybe I will give my job to Halwa Aminah as a moderator because I will be the next presenter.
Okay. Let me prepare your PPT first, Kalisa. Okay. All right. So, oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your outstanding presentation. Now we're moving to the next presenter, Kalisa Jihan Mahira. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Halwa. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Kalisa Jian Mahira with NIM 222330138. So, today I'll be presenting my research proposal titled The Effectiveness of Flipped Classroom and Traditional Methods in Improving Student Speaking Fluency at the 11th grade of SMA X. Next slide, please. Okay, let me start with why this research matters. Speaking fluency has long been a major challenge in Indonesian EFL classroom. Despite years of EFL classroom of English instruction, many students still struggle to speak, and the main reason is how English is taught. Most classes are still teacher-centered, leaving students very little time to actually practice speaking. This is where the flipped classroom comes in. By moving content delivery outside the classroom, more time opens up for real communicative practice. So it sounds promising, but its effect on speaking fluency in Indonesian senior high school is still understudied. The gap is what this study aims. So the gap, the students will still show limited speaking fluency despite years of EFL instruction in Indonesian senior high school. The main problem is traditional. Yep, this teacher-centered methods more dominate, and the opportunity is the flipped classroom reallocates class time toward interaction. Next slide, please. Okay, so there is some key problems with this question and objectives. So I will summarize all of this page. So from that background, I identified four core problems. There are students limited speaking fluency despite years of the study, the dominance of teacher-centered instruction, the lack of flipped classroom research in Indonesian senior high school, and the absence of any comparative study at SMAX specifically. So to address this, I formulated four research questions. Is there significant differences in speaking fluency between the two groups? Does the flipped classroom significantly improve speaking fluency? Does the traditional method significantly improve speaking fluency? And what are students' perceptions toward the flipped classroom? The objectives of this study directly mirror these four questions, as you can see, guys, on the screen. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the study rests on three key concepts. The first one is the flipped classroom. Student engage materials like videos at home, and class time is used for active task skill like discussion and oral presentations. It's rooted in constructivist learning theory by Bergman and Sams 2014. Okay, second, the traditional method, teacher-centered, is dominant in Indonesian senior high school due to large class sizes and text limitations. It tends to leave students as passive recipients with little room for speaking practice. The next one, and the last maybe about speaking fluency itself. Fluency itself measured across three dimensions: speed, fluency, breakdown fluency, and repair fluency. Based on Suzuki and Karmos, assessment uses a 5 criterion rubric. The first one is fluency, second one pronunciation, third one grammar, fourth one vocabulary, and the last one is communication. Next slide, please. Okay, research gap framework and hypothesis. How this study is positioned. When I review existing literature, most studies on flipped classroom focus on higher education or non-Indonesian context. Comparative quasi-experimental research targeting speaking fluency in Indonesian senior high school is still very limited, and that's where this study fits in. As for the hypothesis, H1 proposes there is a significant differences in speaking fluency between the two groups. H1-2 suggests the flipped classroom significantly improves speaking fluency, and H1-3 proposes the traditional method also leads to significant improvement. So the independent variable using X as a teaching method, and then classroom process to gain understanding, active participation and engagement, and dependent variable or Y is student speaking fluency. Next slide, please. Okay, the methodology overview. For this study uses a qualitative approach with a quasi-experimental design. It conducted at SMA-X with grade 11 students in the 2024/2025 academic year. The sample will be around to 60 or 72 students from two inside classes of roughly 30 or 36 students each. So selected through simple random sampling, one class gets the flipped classroom treatment and the other will be get the traditional method with 6-minute session each for a fair comparison. Next slide, please. All right, for data analysis, I'll use 4 procedures, as you can see, guys, on the screen. First, the Shapiro-Wilk test to check data normality, then a paired samples t-test to measure within group improvement from pre to post test. This answers RQ2 and RQ3, and independent samples t-test to compare post test scores between the both groups for RQ1, or math with me you if the data is not normal, and finally ANCOVA if there is a significant pre-test difference between groups to adjust for baseline. Next slide, please. Okay, expected contribution. This study is expected to contribute to English language teaching by comparative evidence on whether the flipped classroom supports greater speaking fluency development than traditional instruction in Indonesian senior high school. So it gives teachers and school comparative evidence to decide whether the flipped classroom is worth implementing for speaking fluency or not. And student perceptions are also captured to give a fuller picture. Okay, next. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I'm very open to any question, feedback, or suggestion from the panelists. Okay, thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, Kalisa.
Okay, thank you, Halwa. Okay, the last session maybe will be presented by Ahmad Faiz Farhan.
Okay, thank you, Alisa. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon for everyone here, for all the participants as well as the speakers and the moderator. So I would like to begin my presentation of my proposal with the title, The Correlation Between Code Switching Frequency and Speaking Skill Ability among English Department Students. Next slide, please. So I would like to talk about the problem identification and the background of this study. So the code switching itself is the alternation between Indonesian and English interaction, which is we usually find in bilingual conversations, right? But this particular activity, actually the code switching and code mixing activity, is popularized among general people by the phenomenon that's called bahasa jaksel or fourth language or bahasa kentut in Indonesian term. So this particular phenomenon among general people, they think of this particular action as an act of showing off or an ineffective way of conversation. However, in our point of view as a bilingual, this action is actually a very normal a way of speaking because we possess two language for us to speak, and sometimes we find it is more efficient to explain something within English instead of Indonesian bahasa. So for the gap identification, so the prior studies that I found, whether in article or news, that they are usually export the motives and the context qualitatively. That's the reasons of the bilinguals of why they use code switching or code mixing. However, I could find very few or even almost none that about the research quantitatively measured how the code switching frequency affects the communication outcomes. Also, how it predicts the ability of one's ability to speak English very well. And the lack of data linking frequency to speaking performance leads me to research this particular topic. So the study shifts focus from the description of the reasons, that is the qualitative, to statistical testing. Next slide. With the hypothesis, the null hypothesis that there is no positive correlation between those two variables, that is the frequency of code switching and the communication effectiveness and the speaking ability. And with the hypothesis number 2, that is the higher code switching frequency is positively correlated with high speaking ability in English conversations. Next slide. So the objectives of this research is to measure students' switching frequency and also to measure communication and speaking performance. The first measure is for the independent variable, and the communication and speaking performance is for the dependent variables. And with this the variable, I will analyze the relationship between the code switching frequency with the English speaking skill performance and proficiency, and whether this test could predict the power of code switching frequency on speaking performance, of how much they could predict this frequency in how well one could speak English. Next slide. So these are the variables of this research. The first is code switching frequency as the independent, with the instrument as 20 items of surface with 1 to 5 reference. And the second variable is the dependent variable, that is the speaking ability, that I will test it with rubric scores, including the effectiveness, fluency, pronunciations, and how much time it will take for them to react in a particular conversations, their reaction time stats. And the English proficiency, as the covariate or the additional data that is, I would take it by their self-report. Okay, next slide. So the research design of this study is the correlational of Pearson's correlational coefficients. That is the positive correlation. That means the higher the frequency of code switching and code mixings could lead to high ability of speaking English with the population that is English department students, and with the samplings is a random sampling with the sample size from 50 to 120 students, with the objective of the sample size to ensure the representative and statistical power for the correlation and the regression. Okay, so the data collection for this research will be by two methods. That is, the first is online surveys, and the second is the recorded speaking task from the classroom. Or I would ask them to have a conversations with me. That is, it could lead to a mixed methods where I would be the instrument to test their speaking ability with the ethics that the data I will take is, it would be informed by them with their consent, and they have the right to withdraw, and it will be anonymous and secure storage that would protect their in personal data. Okay. Okay, with the data analysis of this research, I would use SPSS to count how much correlation it would show by these two variables. With the steps is, first is data cleaning and assumption check, and the second is descriptive statistics, that I would count the mean, the variable distribution, and so on. And the third step is the reliability testing using alpha value, that if the alpha value shows 0.05 or to 1 value, it means that the method I use to gather the data would be reliable. And with the fourth steps is the Pearson correlations, that is the positive correlations I will use. That means that I will need the correlation to be positive. That means the higher rate of frequency means the high ability of speaking English. And the fifth step is the hierarchical regression, that with the control of proficiency in English speaking skills. This regression will be needed to predict how much it would predict the outcomes of their ability. And the sixth step is the moderation analysis using the context and interlocutor. it would be needed to assume the effectiveness of their communication using code switching and code mixing with a significant level of alpha value that is at least 0.05 to 1 value. Okay, this is all I could provide with this proposal. Thank you for the time and thank you for the help. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alright, Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Faiz. Your delivery was very confident. It's clear that you've mastered your material inside and out. So maybe the next session will be a Q&A session. So for you guys who want to ask, the time is yours. I will be open for two person.
I would like to ask Kalisa.
All right.
Yeah, I would like to ask to Bunga. Yeah, Bunga's presentation. So Bunga has mentioned that students will be using vintage literature from the 1780s to the early 1990s. Why did you personally, Bunga, chose this specific time range instead of just using modern contemporary texts? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hawa, for the question. As I've mentioned before on my presentation, it is because vintage literature, like somewhere between the range of 80s to 19th, serve a more formal and rich vocabularies, like as we know nowadays as the thesaurus. So the academic and professional writing requires a specific spectrum of vocabulary. So vintage literature serves that as a natural thesaurus. It exposes students to sophisticated synonyms and nuanced expression that help them move away from basic colloquial words like the modern words and toward the academic vocabulary needed for high quality writing. That's why I specified the medias with vintage literature texts. That is my answer. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bunga.
All right. Thank you, Bunga and Halwa. Maybe for the next. Is there anyone want to ask again?
Okay, may I ask a question?
Yes, Bunga.
Okay, this question is for Halisa's presentation. I would like to know how do you handle students who do not have the access to devices or internet at home for the flipped classroom that you mentioned in your research?
All right, thank you. First, I wasn't expect that I will be asking with you. So the answer is, this is a real practical concern. So to address it, I plan to provide offline accessible materials such as downloaded videos or printed reading handouts. So students without reliable internet access can still engage with the pre-class content. So this also ensures that the treatment is applied equitably across all the students in this experimental group. Maybe that's all from me, Bunga.
Okay, thank you so much, Kalisa.
All right. Well, I think that's enough for this session, guys. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. We have concluded all 10 presentations today, starting from Halwa Aminah to Ahmad Faiz Farhan. So I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all the presenters for their hard work and to the audience for their active participants. We also thank our advisors or examiners for their guidance. I hope the feedback received today will be beneficial for everyone's future research. I am Kalisa Jian Mahira, signing off as your moderator, wishing everyone the best of luck with the next steps of your academic journey. Have a wonderful day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Kalisa.